The Grim Reaper Express, Chapter 7, First Part. As Xenogortian and Benelli headed toward the Iron Castle's control room, waves of anxiety far from befitting their ageless and immortal clan crashed in their hearts. The circumstances under which they'd first boarded had been shrouded in a truly bizarre air. As they hastened down the road, a lone man had suddenly appeared to them out of the darkness. Wearing a rounded hat with a visor in front, a formal coat with iron buttons, a bow tie, and with a black ticket holder hung around his neck, he was the conductor of the Iron Castle they'd heard about. While bombarded with looks of suspicion and ill will, the man didn't seem the least bit intimidated, pointing to the rear and then telling them through gestures to wait there before he once again vanished into the darkness. The reason the three noblemen could only watch him go without further investigating the situation was because from the time the conductor appeared until the time he left, they'd been subjected to an unearthly aura, the likes of which they'd never experienced. At that point, from the direction the conductor had vanished, there was the faint yet solemn growl of machinery drawing nearer, like an unsettling rumble of thunder, pushing away the night air and darkness that held sway in this world. Something outrageously large stopped right beside them, about 3 minutes later. It was as tall as a 5-story building and had light pouring from countless windows. From the white vapor it ceaselessly discharged, they could tell it was steam-powered. Though they could only assume the energy to produce that steam came not from the typical turbine, but from some extra-dimensional fuel source. One of its iron doors opened, and an iron platform slid out by their feet. What shall we do? It may be a trap. But if we refuse the invitation, we might be attacked. Moreover, it would shame us to have the one within the castle thinking us afraid. Benelli, who'd been the one to ask what they should do, said, This may be the key to the mysteries of the unknown greater noble. A chance to learn the now-forgotten knowledge of the ancients, to see the fruit that knowledge might bear. I'm going. And with that he stepped forward. Sooner or later, I shall spot D and his lot from the skies. I too shall go. What say you, Braylo? Naturally it was Gortian who asked this. The young fiend of the dual blades turned to the Iron Castle with the face and gaze of a corpse, giving a nod. Once they were on board along with all their horses and coffins, the Iron Castle soon set off. The train's departure was so rough, it hardly seemed the work of the nobility's engineering, yet that only served to endear it to the three noblemen. The conductor from earlier appeared with other shadowy men in similar uniforms, and once they'd taken custody of the horses and coffins, the trio was escorted to a sumptuous room. Not so much as a speck of dust lay in the corridors leading there, and the place was so clean. It seemed this had to be its very first day of service. Why, as the Iron Castle returned from slumbering for millennia? Xenogortian inquired, head tilted to one side. I certainly have my concerns, Benelli said, extending one finger. Why is it operating again? Extending a second, he continued. Why did it let us aboard? A third finger extended. And where is it supposed to be going? As for the second one, that I know, said a gloomy voice. It was that of Zeno Braylo. The other two looked surprised. He was a man not given to much thought. Swordsmen and warriors in general were not concerned with worldly affairs, but this young man in particular banished them from his thoughts. So single-minded was Braylo that as long as he had an opponent to cross swords with today, he wouldn't mind if the whole world were ending tomorrow. Yet he had offered something. "Listen," he said. As soon as the word was out, Gorshin and Benelli heard a familiar sound. Gray soldier and blue soldier were rattling in their scabbards. The two magic swords clanging together could mean only one thing: that a foe worthy of being cut down was close at hand. "Well, fancy that," Gorshin groaned. "Interesting," Benelli said, his hand reaching around for the great scythe on his back. "Where is he, Braylo?" The young swordman's eyes were only half open to begin with, but he shut them and mastered his breathing. The other two even slowed their breathing in unison. In that manner 5 seconds passed. Then 10. "He's coming," Braylo murmured. No other sound could be heard. The room was completely soundproof. Still, the young nobleman heard someone's approaching footsteps or breathing, or could somehow detect his presence. They didn't ask where he was. Both Gorshin and Benelli were staring at Braylo. No matter who the foe there might be, it would undoubtedly be this young nobleman who would fire the first volley in this war. "In the corridor," Braylo said, coming down it. The rattling of the scabbards intensified. "What's he coming for?" asked Gorshin. "It's obvious," Benelli said, a single bead of sweat rolling down his cheek. "To drink our blood." The eyes of all three began to burn crimson. A noble seeking the blood of nobles. The notion was so abnormal, so perverse, it stimulated them on their subconscious level. Braylo looked up. His eyes became riveted to the door. The other two trembled. They too understood. The enemy was right outside, and they knew how terrible he was. With a click, the golden doorknob turned. Braylo reached for his bag with both hands. Benelli drew his great scythe, and then, beyond the smoothly opening door, they saw a figure who could only be described as a giant. And at that very moment the Iron Castle engaged its emergency brakes to the accompaniment of an ear-shattering squeal of iron on iron, and the three noblemen were sent flying. However, even after the group had boarded again, the Iron Castle didn't move an inch. So Gorshin and Benelli headed off in search of the control room. They were in search of it, because they had no more than a vague notion that it would probably be somewhere toward the front. But nowhere in the castle were any sort of maps or layouts posted. I didn't think this could be derailed, much less take a plunge like this. The greater nobility's technology wasn't so great after all. But Gorshin countered Benelli's complaint, saying, "That's a bit rash, Benelli. I've heard that ordinarily. The Iron Castle ran through an enormous magnetic tube. Undoubtedly the tube has been damaged in places over the ages. To wit, when it allowed us to board, it was already running out of the ordinary. But since it did run, there's no reason to believe another fall would put it out of operation. And then there's the matter of the presence we sensed. And that is why 2 of us are going. Surely he must be the same greater noble who crafted the Iron Castle." "There can be no doubt, but certainly a vehicle of this size would be well stocked with human blood. They come after us?" "Why, indeed," Gorshin said, head cocked to one side. "We modern noblemen have no way of knowing what the greater nobles of long ago were thinking. Perhaps not even the sacred ancestor could. Even before Benelli could give a look that would tell him to stop, Gorshin held his own tongue. Regardless of the situation, no matter what reason one might have, It was strictly prohibited for any noble to slight or slander the sacred ancestor in any fashion, even 10 centuries after his disappearance. The sacred ancestor reigned over the world's night even now. Coughing once, Gorshin continued. Why did the sacred ancestor propose living in harmony with the lowly humans? Though it was a splendid idea he had. He meant that. However, Gorshin also intended to make amends for his initial slight. And because if one wasn't mindful of that, misfortune would befall them. This was a notion that had gone beyond mere superstition to become a phenomenon in which many among the nobility believed. Up ahead, a gorgeous lounge came into view. Ah, oh my. The eyes of the two noblemen went wide at the figures passing before them. On a marble floor, men in black formal wear and women in white dresses walked with gliding steps, or peered through the windows into the darkness beyond. Glass and gemstones glittered here and there, while the languid strains of classical music stirred a chemical reaction from the stillness of the lounge's air. The shadowy musicians played translucent instruments were probably modeled after those of antiquity. They were illusions. Even realizing they were phantoms projected by the Iron Castle, the two noblemen still couldn't make their eyes off them for some time. A couple wearing old-fashioned scarves walked toward the pair, and only after they'd passed through the nobleman without a sound did the two finally notice the spiral staircase to their right running from floor to ceiling. After climbing it, they found another spacious hall and several corridors that ran off into the depths of the Iron Castle. Page break. Big is fine, but this is ridiculous, Gorshin murmured after climbing up to the 5th floor. The interior of the vehicle was more functional here, with more of the doors being iron or steel plate. Looming before the pair was what could only be the door to the control room. Don't let your guard down, said Gorshin. Understood, Benelli replied with a nod. They absolutely couldn't forget the mysterious individual who lurked somewhere in the Iron Castle. Gorshin opened the door. It wasn't locked. That in itself was unthinkable. Many gangs of human thieves targeted traveling nobles. When they did so, they always struck during the daylight hours. The nobility's vehicles carried astonishingly few armaments. That was on account of confidence in their overwhelming physical superiority to humans. If ensconced in coffins of the nigh indestructible metal they developed during their tribulations with the aliens, their safety was guaranteed until the end of time. In the meantime, humans would have to settle for stealing jewels and items of precious metals. Things the nobility could produce ad infinitum. That was best for all involved. A sturdy lock would guard against any stupid savages, not content with riches but intent on hijacking the castle. The control room of the Iron Castle resembled the helm of a massive ocean liner. There was no one before the curving window that called to mind an enormous screen. Of course, there was no yoke or wheel, or so much as a dial or gauge. Not at all dubious, Gorshin stood at the middle of the window. Light surrounded him. It took the form of the non-existent wheel and gauges. This, too, was an illusion, like the people who assembled in the lounge. It was a fantasy projected by machinery. However, a slight turn of his head allowed him to survey the phantom console. And after one glance at it, he said, "Energy level reads at full. The rails are bent, but if we can get the Iron Castle moving, its auto repair systems should go into operation. Starting it up. Nothing wrong with the drive or power systems. Benelli inquired, his deeply creased face twisting sadly. Not that he was sad. His face only looked that way. Negative. Here we go. Gorshin grabbed the glowing lever and pushed it forward. Lights twinkled in the phantom console. Power systems automatically shut down by the accident had gone back on. The vehicle shuddered irregularly, but in no time that gave way to orderly mechanical action. The Iron Castle had begun to rise. Gorshin, Benelli called out from behind him. Though it was his ordinary tone, his voice seemed a little hard. When Gorshin turned and looked, his body stiffened for a moment. It wasn't that he was startled by the gorgeous figure in black who was face to face with Benelli. Rather, he cursed himself for not noticing the presence of the intruder. You. When did you... On seeing Benelli's right hand reach for his great scythe, Gorshin believed they would triumph. Because live or die, while Benelli did battle with their foe, he could make his own preparations for combat. First part, and